He's my brother by another mother. Thank you very much, Joe. I appreciate that. Well, you know, we may have come over in different ships, those of us from the newspaper industry and television and radio, but we're in the same boat now. Trying to figure out why anybody should continue to pay us and why we shouldn't stand by until all that's left is YouTube and blogs. If somebody's going to go out and check on that crumbling highway, you got to pay them to go out. So what's the reason to pay us? What can we do? Well, you know, at NBC we've been doing some research, and we found that news is kind of in the air now, all around us. And the average person, this is only anecdotal, but the average person that we've talked to said that they cannot tell us where they first heard any news story. Was it the back of a taxi cab? Was it the Daily Oklahoman? Was it the New York Times? You know, back 40 years ago when I was a young reporter, we would all sit there and watch the three local stations and then, you know, pat each other on the back if we were 20 seconds ahead of the other person. Well, that's all gone because now the first story always comes on somebody's cell phone. And while, of course, we must continue to cover the news, that's not, as we found out, financially viable reason for people to actually tune in and pay us to do it. So how do we survive? I was in Ireland the other day at a bar. Can you imagine? Reporter at a bar? And I was talking to a guy who worked for one of the Dublin newspapers. And I said, you know, you guys still have a bunch of newspapers. And this town's about the size of, I don't know, Oklahoma City maybe, Milwaukee, something like that. And they've got like 3 or 4 papers. And he says, well, we saw what was going on in the rest of the world, and we did a very unpopular thing. We went out and we hired fiction writers, and we invited them to come and sit on the rim of our newspaper. And, of course, all the editors hated that, and the reporters really hated it because, of course, they know how to tell stories. But the fiction writers, one in sports, one in business, one on the front page, were not there to tell you how to do the reporting or to cover the news. What they were there to do was to remind all of us, because we give it scant attention, that there are building blocks to telling a good story. And sometimes we overlook that. Especially in my business, for about the last 10, 15 years, the only thing we've been doing has been the town crier. Guess what? There's a flat tire. And we come back maybe 6 weeks later, there's still a flat tire. You know, and that's it, pretty much. We do 15, 17 live shots a day on 3 facts. And we still do that. And then we spin it off into a cable talk show, and the cable guys talk about the 3 facts until midnight. So no wonder nobody knows what or where they first heard anything. But this guy from Dublin, Ireland said, look, after we got over our ego, we realized that the fiction writer would say something like this. He said, you like James Patterson, the mystery writer? Yeah. His stories are all real short chapters, right? And people can read them in a day, and they're fascinated, and, you know, no matter what their background. He said, okay, wait a minute. You had a stabbing up here on El Reno, and it's a front page story this afternoon? In the old days, all you'd do is, you know, here's our news hole, and we've got some ads here, so, you know, we'll cut here and go to page 2. He says the fiction writer would remind us, as we write our story, take the guy with the knife and have him raise the knife and then go to page 2. Now, he's not telling us anything we didn't know at one point in our life before we got too busy, but they're reminding us over and over again that there are things we can do that will make our stories unique. I mean, to me, there are only 2 approaches to a story. One is a speech, not a story. And that's the town crier approach, you know. We know this, and this is what you need to know. And you can turn on any local news channel, or in a lot of cases the newspapers, and they'll say that over and over again. Or the other approach is what I call the Paul Harvey. You've heard the story. You knew that OU won the football game. But the person telling you the story does it so well that you don't care that you heard it before. And I think that's the saving grace for our business. You have to brand everything you do. There's a reason the Today Show is on for 4 hours. And by the way, we're doing 4 hours with the staff we had for 2. But it's a brand. And everything on the Today Show is a brand. And that's the premise behind it. You don't care what Dotson does if you like the American story. You'll tune in. Now, maybe they did it over at CBS 20 minutes ago, but that doesn't make any difference. I like the American story. And this is as old in television as 60 Minutes. One of the reasons why we're in this problem is 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes was the first program to show that you could actually make tons of money at the network level on news. And the way they set it up was, we're going to get the four horsemen, and you're going to tune in because you like Morley Safer. We're not going to promote the story, we're going to promote the people. And if you like the person, you'll tune in. And they took it from the local format, because the local station, if you like Bob Berry 20 years ago doing the news or sports, you may not like the weather guy, but you're going to work through that because you're waiting for, you know, the first story with the guy that you like. So that's how they had a business model. NBC's coming back around to that by saying, all right, we're going to brand everything. And thank God, I'm one of the last, only 3 people I think left at NBC News on the air that's over 60. And there's only one reason I'm still here. And it's not just because I try to do good work, because I know a lot of colleagues who try to do good work that aren't here. But about 10 years ago, I decided I'm going to see if I can figure out how to brand this. Because when I first came to work here in Oklahoma City, back when the earth was cooling, you know, 6 months into it, I was just, you know, I was getting burned out because they didn't appreciate the fact that I was as good as I thought I was. And Bob Berry was the guy doing it with me today. We went down to shoot some Super Bowl 7 or 3 or 5 or whatever, you know. And he said, well, you know, stop complaining. The only way you're going to survive is if you try to make yourself one of a kind. What he really was saying was branding. He says, you'll never be one of a kind. It's just a mind game you play for yourself to keep from becoming burned out. But in the meantime, the people who sign paychecks, the people who sell the advertising will have to think of you. I mean, that's as old as, you know, as storytelling itself. This stuff hasn't changed since somebody went down into a valley, killed a mastodon, came back, and started painting pictures on a cave wall. Said, gosh, you see what I saw today? And there's a reason why one cave was full and the others were kind of cold. Because it was a better storyteller. But because our business is so complex now, just getting the sucker up on the internet and to this and to that, and we're all crossing over into areas of expertise that we're just kind of like a gray area, we don't know, so we're plodding along, that the one thing we should know how to do, and do know how to do, but have forgotten in many cases, is how to tell a story. Now, the examples I'm going to show you today, I'm an essayist, and I started on documentary, so it's long, longer pieces, and they're beautifully shot. And there's a tendency to say, well, yeah, Dotson, if I had your, you know, the crew you worked with, and, you know, I could do that. But then I counter with, if you're doing a story on Twitter, and it's 140 or 160 characters, and you think that's going to be tougher, well, look at a great country western song lyric. They can do it in 140, you know, honey, the gutter ain't a step up from you. Don't pee down my leg and tell me it's raining. This is country western. I mean, there's 1,000 stories in that, or a great newspaper headline writer, over and over again, that sort of thing. So it really doesn't make any difference what format you're working in, or need to work in the next 4 or 5 years. It's, you know, what I do is, instead of spending my time worrying about what's happening or how it's changing, I say, look, who's doing Twitter really well? If I got to do Twitter today, I want to emulate that person. If I got to do a longer form piece, I want to emulate that. If I got to do video, I want to do that. And I know a lot of people out here in the newspaper business are saying, you know, well, we used to have a photo staff to do pictures, and we paste them into our stories, and that's pretty much it. And in fact, you guys over on the television side, if you look at headline news and some of the other stuff, it's the same way. You know, it's an animal we don't think of. And I say, you think of it all the time. Really good writers and really good editors are always thinking visually. If there's a flood down here south of Norman, and it's day 3 on that flood, and you walk into somebody's house where the water's gone down, and there's a line of dust on the apples on the shelf in the kitchen, you would probably love that detail in your story. That's a visual detail. The only difference is, if you've got to go out and shoot it yourself, is instead of writing it in your head, you make sure you find those little details that push the story along. So, you know, we all learn who, what, when, where, and why. But if you take the premise that all of that doesn't pay money anymore, because they kind of expect you to do that, but they don't know whether you did it or not. Let me give you a little other mantra that I learned years ago, and I think it's much more appropriate for today's society. I remind myself of this daily, no matter whether it's a complex story or a Twitter line. All stories are about, hey, get their attention right away. You don't set the scene for an hour and a half. You don't do James Michener, you know. Somebody gets shot on the first paragraph. Hey. Then the second word is often overlooked. It's you. There's so darn much news floating around that even if a train falls off of a trestle in Pakistan, if by the second line of your copy you haven't said, this is why it's important to you in Tulsa, you've lost them. They've checked out. So immediately you tie the story to your viewer or reader. Immediately. Hey, you. The third part is see. Hey, you, see? The see is what we've always done. These are 3 or 4 facts that we've got, right? Hopefully, it's 3 or 4 facts that nobody else has, but even if it's 3 or 4 facts that everybody has, if you tell it like Paul Harvey, people are going to want to hear the facts again. And then, of course, the last one is so. So why should anybody care? Hey, you, see, so. Let me show you a piece and see if you can see the hey, you, see, so in this story.
Today's American Bob Dotson comes from Arlington National Cemetery. As we observe this Veterans Day, Bob remembers the newest veterans who are buried there and the mothers they left behind.
There is a section of Arlington National Cemetery where death is too fresh for simple headstones. Many graves hold pictures, though technically that's not allowed.
I want them to see this person who's here.
Paula Davis's only child, Justin, loved God, country, and Bruce Lee. He made his own kung fu movies on the front lines in Afghanistan. The 19-year-old Army private dreamed of being an actor. Beth Bell's son, an infantry rifleman, passed out Beanie Babies and rebuilt houses in Afghanistan.
He was always the peacemaker, even as a little boy.
The kind of kid who, when he touched someone's life, they shined. Beth was planning his homecoming party when Marine Lance Corporal Nicholas Kervin was killed.
In your case, the clock stopped on Mother's Day. Does it get any better?
Yeah.
You feel like you should have just jumped across the ocean and been there to hold them that last minute.
Marine Lance Corporal Eric Herzberg's story ended at age 20. His mother, Gina Barnhurst, still writes Eric letters that are arrows to her heart.
How do we keep having birthdays and Thanksgivings and Christmases without being able to hug you and see you?
But they do, because these women have formed a special bond, gathering together week after week to watch over their sons like mothers on playgrounds.
We can talk to each other and lean on each other and cry to each other and laugh with each other and share memories of our sons with each other.
We don't have to be the actors that we so often have to be.
And you cut through to that deep connection because we feel each other's pain.
The mothers also reach out to others.
I had a mother who said, I know this sounds really strange, but could you take 26 cents to my son's grave? Because they never ended a letter without, since he was a little boy, a quarter for a call, a penny for your thoughts, and all your mama's love.
Ziamara Menya's son, Army Corporal Andy Anderson, was killed in Iraq 2 years ago. Now the Army Reserve is sending Andy's twin brothers, Raphael and Randall, to Afghanistan. The Marines in Eric Herzberg's unit were sent back to Iraq the day before his memorial service.
The young men stumble and fall.
On the second anniversary of his death, they are home to finally say goodbye.
When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember him.
The first grave at Arlington Cemetery was dug near that house to remind a Civil War general about war's human toll. 1,800 men lie in a single grave in Robert E. Lee's Rose Garden. Now there are as many as 30 burials a day. Nearly 1 in 10 who died fighting in Iraq or Afghanistan lie in Arlington National Cemetery, the highest percentage from any war. There are more than 500 sons and daughters, fathers and wives in Section 60. Beth Bell's son Nicholas was the first to be buried in a brand new row of graves. That was 3 years ago. Now 5 more stretch beyond his headstone.
What's the one thing that you fear the most?
That people will forget. They will forget about the sacrifices that these men and women have made.
Behind each stone are a face and a story. For today, Bob Dotson, NBC News, with an American story in Arlington National Cemetery.
The reason for all of us to remember on this Veterans Day. We're back in a moment. This is today.
We're all trying to find some time in our day for that level of storytelling. So let me give you 3 tips that I've found over the years that I've stolen from other people that makes you much more efficient in gathering both the video and information. When I was a young reporter with NBC, we were staking out the Shah of Iran's son because the Shah was sick. So now you know how long ago that was. And the son was out in West Texas going through Air Force school. But they had him under pretty tight security, and so we were there all afternoon and never saw him. So we all went off to lunch and left the photojournalist there, just in case he wandered through. And when I came back, Scotty Berner of NBC News, our cameraman, said, well, I got a soundbite from the Shah of Iran's kid and got all the video, and I got some pictures of his guards and all that. And everybody goes, you did? Yeah. How'd you do it? He said, well, he says, I used the rule of 3s and filling the silence. I said, what's that? He says, well, he says, now if you were here, you would have run up to him and said, look, I'm Bob Dotson, Big Tool from NBC News. And he would have run back and jumped up this, up over the hedge and been gone again. He says, but I watched this kid walking down the street and realized he didn't look like he lived in Lubbock. So I figured he might be the Shah of Iran's kid, kind of looked like the pictures we'd seen. But the boy was looking at some flowers. So instead of running up and saying, hi, I'm Scotty Berner, I mean, he obviously knew I was media because I had my camera on, walked up to him. But I said, boy, those are pretty chrysanthemums. And the kid said, oh, yeah, I like flowers. And Scotty said, true story, my dad used to run a flower shop. Now they're talking flowers now. And the kid said, well, my dad loves flowers too. And then Scotty said, my dad passed away a couple of years ago. True. And the kid goes, well, my dad has soundbite. But he still wasn't sure that this was the Shah of Iran's son. But about that time, a couple of guards popped up over there and went, oh, and they're running down, And now Scotty didn't turn around and start arguing First Amendment freedoms with somebody carrying their Second Amendment freedom. He just started shooting other pictures to go with it. Oh, hi, how are you? He's talking to him. Blip, 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 blip. So by the time we got back, he had it all. And then he explained it to me over a drink that night. He said, people will always answer questions they think you have asked. And then they will explain their answer. Neither one of those things will generate much for news. What generates the news is the third part, the rule of 3s. Answer the question they think you've asked, explain their answer, and then if you just sit there and look at them for a beat, something people in television rarely do these days, they go, well, I don't think he understands. Well, dummy, I killed your wife. And there's your soundbite or your quote. Because people get uncomfortable with silence. If you talk to a good homicide detective, he said, if you're in an investigation room, the person who speaks first loses. Because they're generally telling something out of their concern for the silence in the room. So he says, Scotty says, that's where I got it, watching everybody cover the cop shop. And so the guys that were really good detectives were able to get information that nobody else could. So this works both for stuff that you'd put in your story, but also for good background. Because the rule of 3s works all the time, and the corollary of that is filling the silence. But the thing that Scotty did so beautifully with the Shah of Iran's son was what I call the non-question question. We're really lazy in journalism today because there are so many people who are professional sound bites. The mayor, the governor, the celebrities. They all know how to give us something in 30 seconds, and we're set because we've got to do 108 stories today. Unfortunately, they've given that same sound bite to 108 news outlets. So what have we really gained? We've gained nothing. Our stories stand out pretty much in direct proportion to how well we are able to take ordinary people, find the most articulate things they can say and most passionate things, and throw them in your story, because you're the only one that's got that person saying what they said or doing what they're doing. So Scotty says, you ask the non-question. You put them at ease by talking about something they seem to be interested in at the moment, and then you gradually, without asking a question, move them back onto the topic that you're interested in. And then when they start talking about it, shut up, because they will probably give you a better answer than anything you could ask for. And I have used that over and over and over again in my career when I'm in a hurry, and I'm with ordinary people, because I found, as many probably young reporters in here find, you've done your interview, you're packing up and you're leaving, and then they give you 5 or 6 great video sound bites because they're comfy. Well, the whole idea of the non-question question is to make them comfy ahead of time, so they forget that you're holding that dang high-definition camera, and you got the mic over here, and you got your notepad, for the newspaper article you're going to do, and you got your computer over here, You want them to kind of forget all that and just be comfortable. So what Scotty taught me when I was 29 years old, and the hey, you, see, so, I have used to this day anytime I get into a complex story or a quick turnaround situation where I just say, well, where am I? Am I at the hey, the you, the see, or the so? Because that stuff doesn't change. At the heart of everything we do, it's like a big circus tent. We applaud each other on the back, especially today, when we can get the circus tent up. Gosh, we figured out how to do internet. We figured out how to do this. We're multimedia. We're convergent all over the place. Nobody comes to watch the tent. They assume you're going to get the tent up. You watch the Today Show, and we do Where in the World, and we're hanging off of the backs of bungee cords in order to get some 2-hour, now 4-hour remote from Bhutan. Everybody figures, that's great, we do that all the time, And, of course, all of us talk about it, but the audience wants to see the dancers in Bhutan. That's why they tune in. They don't care that you're there. They assume that you will be there. Now, we all know what a tough job that is, but I think sometimes we've taken so much of our day just getting that tent up that we're robbing ourselves of the things we do the best, which is storytelling. And I don't care if in 5 years they delivered on the backs of milk cartons or a laser beam or on a T-shirt chip that shows up and suddenly it's KTUOK and the Daily Oklahoman down here. Doesn't make any difference. Only 3 things that we've ever used ever in communication: words, pictures, and natural sound. And what I mean by natural sound is it could either be a quote or interview, but it could also be a bubbling river. Because as you write your story, or as you put your story together multimedially, you're going to be adding those little details. People want to know that it was a fast-moving river that caused the drowning. So you want to make sure you have your microphone and your camera up for a couple of seconds, and you see how fast the river is. It's all in the details. Like, for instance, I won't show you the story, but it's a good case in point. There was a woman firefighter from San Jose who went over to Vietnam on a vacation, and somebody showed her a bunch of dog tags from the Vietnam War, and she bought up as many as she could get. She ended up with 500 or 600 of them, and then came back, and as a hobby would send them back to people or their families, and it might be the only thing they had of them. So we waited until we could find somebody that was near her, because otherwise it would, my stories are all about people. But especially today, it's very difficult to convey issues, because no one is going to give you the time to convey it like we used to do it. But if you convey how the issue affects people, they'll sit and watch it forever and get more and more interested because they see it in their own lives. Well, that's the same way here. We didn't want her to just finish up doing her thing and then mailing it off and then go to Ohio and have the guy open it up and say, that's really great. She sent me this thing. I love it. No. We wanted to bring somebody down, and we found somebody whose brother had died, and this fellow lived up in San Francisco, so he just drove down. He wanted to meet her anyway. So now we're going to have them getting together. He wanted to show her something in return for the, for the dog tag. And he had a bunch of pictures of his brother, brother was a sergeant in the Marines, and he was like, da-da-da-da. And I looked on the box, and there was a picture of his brother at age 10 at a birthday party with oversized chaps riding a pony. And I said, show her that one. And he said, I got it. You're right. It's about my brother. It's not about Sergeant Bill Fern. So that was the grace note that was in that piece that turned the corner, because immediately, he wanted to give her something back, just like people normally do. And when he showed her that, in her mind up to that point, these guys were all GIs. And now she realized this was some guy's 10-year-old kid brother, missing now for half a century. That's the kind of detail you could put in a newspaper article. That's the kind of detail you can put in Twitter. Doesn't make any difference. And the beauty of all the stuff that we have to do now, we all know the challenges, but the beauty of it is, if you've got a story that you can't visualize, you can put that on the blog with a couple of pictures. If you've got great sound, you can put that on your little video feed. If you've got great pictures, you can split it all up. You can, be like the really efficient farmer. You can use everything, the hooves, the tails, and all that. But it's not so... I remember having this discussion 40 years ago with a cameraman who said, you write words, I take pictures, I don't want anything to do with what you do. And I said, you write words all the time. And he said, no, I don't. So we went down to, after Woodstock, there were a lot of wannabe Woodstocks around the country. And there was one here in Oklahoma. And Darrell had been all night. Darrell Barton's the guy's name. He went on to become a photojournalist for 60 Minutes and he's had a long, great career. But Darrell was there with them all night long. I came down to pick up the film, race it back for the noon news. And I said, well, Darrell, what you got? He says, now, remember, I'm not a reporter. I said, right. He says, well, breakfast was either smoked or passed around in a bottle. I said, you got pictures of that, right? He said, oh, yeah. I said, Darrell, that's writing. He said, well, I know, I just told you what I got pictures of. And I said, that's writing to pictures. And I said, the only thing that makes it a little better is if your second line can fill in to the corners of that picture things that they can't see. What did it smell like? If you're at a big tornado that's 100 miles long and 50 miles wide, and it goes through a pine forest, and it's middle of the night, and you're riding in, and your first shot is at dawn, you could smell the path of the storm before you could see it. And then you build a little dramatic open, and people are into it, as opposed to 105 people lost their homes in Albemarle County overnight. That's not a story. A story is, hey, lean closer because something's going to happen. And these are things that we all know about, but we've set aside because we have to do so much, and there are so many people out there who want to spin your story that they'll be glad to give you the 20-second soundbite that they give everybody else. They'll even hand out video for you. They'll tell you how to do it. Look at most web pages today. Aren't they really cluttered? Don't you, when you go to the web page, they're dropping things up here and pulling things out here, and then some guy's yapping at you already, And yet, we were talking the other night, iPhone's going to get a hold of a web page, and they're going to bring it all out, and they'll have nice white space, and you go, oh, I understand it now. I did a story on inventors the other day, and these two guys have more profitable inventions than anybody since Edison, and they pointed out Edison's dead. And so the obvious question in the piece was, what do you do? It's the same kind of quandary we're all looking at. And they said, look, you've got to make whatever you do mindlessly simple. When the VCRs first came out, they always blink in midnight because you were too frustrated to set it up. And finally, some guy came up with DVR and they said, you want to watch nightly news tonight? Yeah. Okay. You want to watch it tonight or every night? Every night. Fine. Forget it. Mindlessly simple. Suddenly, everybody's got a DVR, right? And yet we're all sitting around going, oh, gee, how are we going to get out of this malaise that we're in? We've got to come up with something entirely new. We've got to go way out of our comfort zone and converge and throw crap on... Mark Twain used to say, I'm sorry this letter is so long I didn't have time to write a short one. That's just another way of saying you got to work at this until it becomes more simple. And so when you look at the web pages today, and if they look cluttered and weird, they are cluttered and weird. And probably that's why people are clicking right past your web page. Maybe you simplify it a little bit and say, this is simple, but you're going to get some kind of cool stuff here. And then maybe somebody starts paying it. I don't know. I'm just saying. At the heart of it all, you have to build in surprises all the way through, whether you've got a 20-second VO or a Twitter or a 2-hour documentary or whatever, long article, chapters. Everything's got to be a surprise. You've got to raise that knife and find out the knife doesn't really go into the woman, it goes in the cow. And the cow goes and kicks over the light, and something else happens. And once you've established that there's going to be surprises all the way through, and you foreshadow that, then you start grabbing an audience. Because the best emails I get are people say, you made me late for the bus today. If they got to go to the bathroom, I want them to go to the bathroom after my story. That's how I always structure all these stories. Now look and see if you can find the surprise that was brought about by the non-question question in a story called Farm to Fame.
Kleenex collection. Thank goodness for Kleenex.
Today's American Story with Bob Dotson begins in Centennial, Colorado, but ends where you won't believe. You see, this one is for all of us who sing in the shower and then dare to dream.
In most of the country, time is cut in tiny slices, too thin for thought. But out here on the high plains, the rhythm of life is different. From dawn to dusk, Chuck Taylor would listen to the radio and wonder why he wasn't making music.
Look around you, there's beauty and music everywhere. I wanted to do my part. I wanted to express what I was feeling.
He also thought it might be a good way to meet girls.
Not only you're a rock star, but Meatloaf already kind of conquered the chubby long-haired guy thing back in the 70s.
So one day, the farmhand from Centennial, Colorado, auditioned for something else. Elizabeth Elliott, the opera director in Fort Collins, was stunned.
Brought tears to my eyes. It's not often that somebody comes in and sings something that just makes your spine straighten, and it wasn't just the voice. Chuck has soul.
Just 18 months after this first role in Colorado, he won a national audition to sing full-time at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City. The only Italian he knew was double latte.
I'm a college dropout. I was a high school dropout before that. I could barely read the little black dots on the page.
You're a Metropolitan Opera singer. You can't. How do you do it?
I hire somebody or have a good enough friend that plays piano to plunk down the notes on a mini disc recorder for me.
Talent got him here. Hard work put him center stage. This month, 6 years after leaving the farm, Chuck, now Charles Taylor, has a leading role in the largest opera house in the world.
I still fight with the feeling of being a fraud.
But he has lived the kind of life they write about in operas.
I should be dead, or at the very least probably in jail or in a box somewhere, begging change. And here I am living this dream.
Taylor loved hitting high notes, but loved getting high better. He was kicked out of school for drinking, started taking drugs, eventually ended up homeless and living in a van. At 24, after the deaths of several of his friends, he hit bottom.
I really thought I was helpless and hopeless.
Take time, go back.
Until music became his lifeline.
So you're trying to woo this chick, right?
Right.
So, woo me.
Chuck is also teaching at Colorado State University, the school he did not graduate.
Better. It's better, yeah. You're one big Cinderella to them.
You should see me in a tutu.
Do you know Ricky Martin? See? He has learned to have fun without drugs. Not serious, but sober 11 years. Chuck even found that girl he went looking for when he left the farm and managed a storybook ending.
Chuck is the kind of guy that people want to be around.
Just to see what will happen next.
So what are you going to do when the fat lady sings on your opera career? I'm going to get back home, get back out here.
Where the rivers twist and turn, a mirror of his life. The one that could have ended tragically, like the operas he sings. For today, Bob Dotson, NBC News, with an American story in New York City.
Up next, some delicious fondue recipes.
Sell, sell, sell. The Today Show is the most profitable program in television history because every 5 minutes for 4 hours a day, they stop and sell something. So you'll never hear me trash talk the Today Show because they're brilliant. They let me do my thing. I think the real storyteller definition is connecting the seemingly unconnected. Now, because of the rule of threes and filling the silence, I got Chuck to tell me about the fact that he was homeless. So it's amazing enough that a guy who was a farm boy is going to end up in the center stage as a lead in the Metropolitan Opera. But my observation, which wasn't even a question, just an observation, was, boy, you started late in life. He was 29 when he did this. And, most people who are musicians, like when they're 11, they do this. And he said, well, I should have been dead or living in a box. And my best question was I didn't ask a second question. I just sat there like this. And pretty soon it all came out. Now, I paraphrased some of that into the little reporter on camera bridge. And by the way, for all you newspaper people, if you ever have to do kind of like reporter talk downs more than just saying this is what I know, what you put on to the reporter on camera is the stuff you cannot visualize, but is essential to the story. So you look around. Can I visualize the river? Great. I'm not going to talk about the river. Can I visualize this? No. But it's important. This is what I talk about. So when you're trying to figure out how to do that, just figure out what 3 or 4 points you still have to get across, and that's what you put on camera with yourself. Here's some other ways of really getting stuff done quickly and with a little bit of grace. I never write my opening first. As soon as editors got to the point where they were nonlinear, I figured, why did my script have to be nonlinear? I write the middle of my story, the C part. The C is what I got first. Because it's simple. This is all the stuff that I've researched. And if I have to cut for time, I'll cut it out of the C, because that's just 2 or 3 points. But in the process of writing the middle of my story, I also say, if I had to put this on the internet right now, if I had to feed this up to Today's Show right now, what's my close? Just like with the opera. When do I get off the stage? And it's a game I play with myself and have all my life. It's even with spot news. It changes all the time, obviously, in a breaking news story. But if you know where you're going, then all you have to do is worry about the building blocks that get you there. So, if, all that time you spend at the computer going, I don't know, there's so much stuff, what. But if you know it's really about that closing shot, then you got it. And then if you're not a writer and you struggle all the time with your opening line, and even people who do write for a living like I do always struggle with our opening lines, I wait till the very end, because by that time I've gone through all my stuff again. I've written the middle, I've written the close. Now I'm going back to the opening, and if I still haven't got an idea for the opening, because of the way I've interviewed, I've got probably 2 or 3 good quotes or sound bites, and I've only got time for one. But the second one I like too. Why do I like it? Because Robert Frost says, a poem begins with a lump in the throat. And all good sound bites ought to elicit some emotion. They should make you mad, they make you happy, they make you interested, they should perk your curiosity, whatever. You never tell a story except to elicit a response from a reader or a viewer. You want them to be active in this. So if you've got one left over, paraphrase the information, the thought, and make it your opening line. It's already to the point, because the person was talking about the story, and it's already probably poetic. Just put it into your own words, use the thought, and you got an opening line. And that's how I can turn some shorter stories around like in 10 minutes and do 15 different versions of it, because I'm looking at all my old sound bites. And because, let me give you for instance, Grade C tornado up in Enid when I was a young reporter. Everybody runs after the mayor because the mayor's going to say, I'm going to ask for some state assistance on this and maybe even the federal government. And the entire press corps is spending like an hour following him around going, God, this is really terrible. Isn't it wonderful? Oh, look at terrible, terrible. You got my side here? That's my side. I'm running, again next year. And instead, Darrell Barton and I would stand around and look and see if there were interesting people that we probably ought to go and take a look at. And we saw this guy with bib overalls looking for something. And this was like day 2 on the tornado. And the reason I call it a C tornado is no injuries, no houses damaged, 2 mobile homes blown over on their side. That's pretty much it. So Darrell says, look, we'll just follow him around. And then we'll paraphrase what the governor or what the mayor is going to say. Not that we're going to forget that, but who cares? Stories with him. So we went and shot what we had to, but we also followed him. And he finally found what he was looking for. And he reached down in this pile of rubble, and he picked it up, and he put it right up next to his face and turned to the camera because he's comfortable now. Darrell's been all around him. He goes, well, it got my teeth, but it didn't get me. So then we went back to English 101. Scene setter, Enid, Oklahoma. Here's this tornado. Foreshadowing. What's this funny guy in the overalls going to be doing? Stick with us and we'll tell you what he's going to be doing. I'm just paraphrasing. And then got to the C part. Well, okay, we lost 3 mobile homes and, people are still mad and all that. And then the so, why should you care? Because he's funny. Well, I got my teeth, but it didn't get me. I learned those lessons early on. And we probably got more reaction out of that story out of anything I could do investigative pieces that went on for months, and they'd go, that's great. What's next? But that they liked because it talks to the human condition. So I figured if I can use those same kind of building blocks, because I approach every story like architecture, and say, okay, no matter how serious or dry the story is, it could be some kind of economic indicator. For instance, I had to do a piece for Nightly one time on the fact that the price of meat had gone through the through the roof, and so the graphics department was calling up, and we had economists and all that kind of stuff. And finally, the news director down at our affiliate in Fort Worth, who's a good old boy, says, why don't you just go down to the stock market and ask for my friend Bill? He's a butcher. And don't worry about all that graphics. He says, you have to ask him for stew meat. Now, not steak like you network tools eat, but stew meat like the rest of us eat. And just whop it right out there on the cutting board and say, this is how much stew meat you could buy with $5 5 years ago. And about 3 years later, and have the guy just whack it off and keep cleaning it. By the time you get down to your point of your story, you're going to have a damned hors d'oeuvre. People are going to get that. He says, you don't need all those people going, well, the economist at the University of Oklahoma said, la, 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 He's absolutely right. You put it into people talk, you make it as visual as you can, and who's to say that doesn't communicate better than all the other things that we were doing just to be... It's the difference between when you were a student and you wanted to fill up the old blue book because it showed your professors that you'd done a lot of research, and then finally somebody said, just tell us the damn story. Because if you've done enough research and you've thought about it long enough, it's going to be a better story anyway. Because now it'll be so simple that the idea is cut straight through, and everybody can get it. Edward R. Murrow used to say, I always try to tell a story that would never insult the intelligence of the Prime Minister. But if the scullery maid is listening from the kitchen, she's fascinated too. And if we haven't got our stories down to Twitter length where we can say in 6 words what this story is about and where we're going to go on it on that day, that's where we start to fall apart. And then when people go to the internet, they say, well, why should I pay for that? But if they think they're going to get something out of it, they'll do it. I want to show you this one final piece because I know it's getting close to time. But this is an illustration of what I think every story ought to have, which is like the guy with the with the bashed up teeth. You need strong central characters to sell your story. People, and you notice in all these stories, I get people to fall in love with the characters early on. That's the you part. This character, no matter how strange he might be, or what part of the country he or she is from, is like you, only more articulate and more interesting story, but it grows right out of your family. And watch this. On this first story, I mean, this last story I'm going to show you, the guy who is the beginning of the story is not who he appears to be. And then you'll go through the story and find out that he is something different. And then by the end of the story, you'll realize he really is something even more different than what you thought. So in other words, there's real character growth. That's how we push this story forward. And you can do that, you know, whether you've got a one-line Twitter or a headline, or whether you've got, you know, a four-page Sunday spread.
A little rain never stops John Espinosa. He plays golf all day, most every day, on a course he and his father Steve built by hand. They carved it out of the 10-acre woods around their Montana home, creating fairways wherever a ball hit a tree. At first, John's mom was not happy.
I thought it was just totally crazy. They just kept going and going.
A hole a year for 10 years.
What's the challenge on this hole?
Clear the house. Don't break any windows.
It lies directly in front of the green. Par 3 if you're good. John is good. John was born with a condition similar to Down syndrome that left him nearly blind in one eye.
Son, can you put your fingers pointing up and down? You can't do it? Okay, would you go ahead and try to hit it any way you can then? Let's see what you can do.
John perfected his stroke by swinging a mop. He wanted desperately to play like his big brother Mike.
You know, it was so hard. I didn't believe in my son. And I said, you can't do this like Michael.
That was grief talking. First, Steve's daughter died of a heart defect. Son Mike was killed in a car accident.
Mike's death nearly overwhelmed Steve. His best friend had died in his arms during the Vietnam War, and now he had lost 2 of his children. So, one day, he kissed his wife, grabbed a gun, then left to take his life.
I would have shot myself. I would have killed myself.
But at the last minute, he realized John needed him. They began to heal each other.
Yes, almost, son.
Steve is disabled himself. Some days, old war wounds put him in a wheelchair. So, John mows the entire course.
He's given himself pride that he can do it, that he can accomplish it.
By himself. Until an army of people heard what he was doing and started donating what he needed.
It's a huge challenge.
Golf course superintendent Jim Peacock.
There aren't a lot of golf courses around him, and he started from scratch, not knowing what to do.
Now that backyard golf course can't hold John anymore. 2 years ago, he qualified for the Special Olympics in Dublin, Ireland. The family that had lost so much finally won a bronze medal.
He became a champion. He's as good as his brother. He doesn't have to live in his brother's shadows anymore.
Nice one, Dave.
Back home, John opened his golf course to anyone with a disability.
2 minutes and you leave me at the truck.
They play for free, for fun. His dog, Zing, has been trained to retrieve the shots they don't like.
Happy.
If heaven is a place where dreams come true, this is truly heaven. Because his dreams come true.
With some children, it's hard to tell how they will excel in life.
We got a lot of work to do on the screen here.
Winners are not always the most obvious. For today, Bob Dotson, NBC News, with an American story in Eureka, Montana.
You know, we have a saying in New York City, there's always somebody in New York who says,
idea for you. And that our time is all sliced too thin for thought these days, and we're just trying to tread water and get by. But I always resist that temptation because of a piece of philosophy I found in a chocolate on a pillow in a motel. I've been in more motel rooms than the Gideon Bible. And it said, success is not a question of being dealt a good hand. It's playing a bad hand well over and over and over again. I think we can survive this, and I think we can have a lot of fun. And the only thing that I have to put forward in that argument is that 40 years later, they're still paying me to go out and do this. So thank you very much. If anybody has a question, I'll be glad to answer it. You're awake. Thank you, Jesus. I was a little concerned because on the one hand you have college students, and on the other hand you've got executives from the newspapers. And I'm going, wow. Where do you, I'm not sure, but you're still awake, so I appreciate that. You're very kind. Yes, sir.
How do you find those people?
How do I find them?
How do you find the applicant, or how do you find
Well, you know, every reporter's got its sources, right? Well, I've been doing this for so long that I have a number of people who've gone through the process. Maybe I've done a story with them before or whatever. And they'll go on vacation and they'll send me an email. And of course, nowadays we have a American Story web page on the Today Show website. And so every time I do a story, you know, I get maybe 600-700 requests in the next couple of days. Most of which are, you know, I got a dog that licks his toes, and you know. But every once in a while, somebody comes up with something that, you know, is really pretty good. The hardest part about this job is you've got to get them before it hits the People magazine or someplace else, you know. But the good part about this job is that most of you in this room walk right past these stories. So it's an open field for me. Because you're too busy going to the governor's news conference and covering the 5,000 things you've got to do every day. And so a number of your employees are calling me or emailing me saying, you know, I passed this story 12 times today, and you ought to come do it. And then I'll come do it, and then everybody gets assigned to go do it. You know, that's how we all work. You know, we all feed off each other. The television reads the newspapers, and then they put it on TV, and then, you know, back and forth.
I didn't know if they started as small papers.
Well, in some cases, certainly they had local media coverage. It's not like these people were hidden. But but today, what passes for these kinds of stories would be the only thing you would get a larger spread would be if they were celebrities. You know, we're in the cult of celebrity these days. Or maybe they don't, you know, they did it in the local paper, but they didn't find out the guy was homeless. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so I try to come up with something, even long distance, because it's very expensive to go out there and do it, and it kind of, you know, it doesn't work. So I try to find something that will make it different, if I can.
What advice would you have for an editor that has a reporter who's a great storyteller and does like to read people's stories, but in the context and the net graph and the facts? Like, how do you elegantly read the important information in the formula that you recommend?
Well, I would say this is the point where you go to the C. Hey, you, that's all part of that fictional stuff that these guys get, you know, that's in their life blood. That's not a problem for them. But you've got some things that, the definition of journalism. Tell me something, you know, because sometimes they wax poetic and they forget all the good facts. I think the challenge to them would be, like, for instance, if you have a story with a lot of numbers, say, you know, people don't really understand numbers, especially if they're piled at them quickly. So your question is, okay, we got these are 7 facts here that are dry numbers we got to get. How would you put this in? Where would you put it in the body? I mean, it doesn't all have to be like in one chunk or graphic off to the side. And so issue them a challenge, and maybe that would be just enough. Because, you know, that was, I mean, I remember an editor would tell me one day, I'd done like 17 stories on the same topic. So now I'm writing stuff about, you know, Martians landing on the moon. And he looked at me and said, he was from Japan, he says, Dotson, son, your balloon is on the roof. Bring it down. Bring it down. Tell us something we don't know. Because I was like, oh, I'll start in dark and starry night. You know, it's like, yeah, well, but that ain't journalism about it. But that was his nice way of doing it. But I found that for me and others like me, if you've issued the challenge, you know, where are we going to stick these 7 things? Instead of, you know, going right up against their ego, like, well, you fool, you're supposed to be a journalist. You know, bullshit walks, you know. Anyway. Anybody else? Yeah. Well, for these stories, it's a little different. But in all my stories, whether I was doing breaking news, I mean, the month before I got this job, I did 55 stories in 55 different cities. So obviously I didn't have time for much. What I try to do is to always do things as efficiently as I can. It's sort of like if you've got the luxury of doing these kinds of stories, it's like a term paper. It has to look like it wasn't done on Tuesday night. So what I do is the minute I decide to do a story or thinking about a story, I start putting it together in my mind. So I'm robbing some time, so it looks like it has more time than it did. These particular stories are all pretty much shot in the day with a little pickup in the morning the following, if we have to. And you know, in a network situation, you spend most of your time just stranger trying to figure out where the hell you are. And then when we edit, we tend to take a day to edit it, and then because it's a network and you got everybody with their fingers on it, half a day to fix it up. That sounds like a lot of time when you're doing 110 stories a week, you know. But in this case, to do that caliber of production in a day, you know, it's fortunately I work with some really talented people who I've known forever, and they all are thrilled to be able to do something out of the ordinary. So they rise to the occasion. By the way, I got a story on Monday morning about that, and this is a classic example. It's a story that ran on the AP. Everybody picked it up. Maybe you even heard about it. About the last pole-powered public ferry in America closing last summer on the James River in Virginia. And everybody went down, and you know, the Washington Post, all of them, and did the Americana disappearing story, all of which could be summed up in 43 seconds. And so they decided, no, we want to do an American story, which is a 5-minute format. I'm going, oh, Jesus, the thing goes from here to here, and it may not even be there when I get there. You know? So we sat around. This is kind of a long answer to your question. We sat around noodling, figuring, okay, I wonder if anybody wants to get married on that ferry. So we looked around. Yes, there was somebody who wants to get married on the ferry. And then we started stretching, and we found, well, who is the ferryman? Is he some old guy? No, he's 30 years old. Turns out he'd gone off to the University of North Dakota to become a pilot. Graduated just when the airline industry stopped hiring pilots. So he gets a job as the pole ferry guy on weekends, right? So now we've got his story. We've got a couple. The couple getting married, he was laid off by the Department of Transportation, which is the exact same company that's dumping off, the government agency that's dumping off the ferry. His wife is a nurse in the emergency room in Charlottesville, and she says, oh, hell, I'll get married to him anyway because I'm all about sickness and in health. You know, I can take care of him. Turns out they go to get their suit. So we're hanging it all in the wedding, you know. So he goes to get his wedding suit, and guess who's his tailor? The guy that used to be the ferryman. He has to take a second job, and now he's doing his wedding suits. So it's like ding, 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 you know, it's all around. And then at the end of it, they finally get like 20 friends, and they're all out there in the middle of the river, and they're getting married, and that's when they drop the last bombshell. She's decided not to get any wedding gifts. And in return, everybody donate to the ferry and see if you could get it running for one more year. And they got enough money. And the deadline is Thursday, October the 1st, when all the money's pulled out. And so I decided I'll just do a story on connections, because this is the way we muscled across America back in the day. And the only thing that's going to save this thing is connections. It's not going to be the government. It's not going to, you know, why should the taxpayers? And it was only $21,000. But the kicker is they can't just take it for $21,000. As long as the state doesn't cover it with its liability insurance, you know, the local historical society would be too much. So it comes down to people. Well, the people have saved it for a few more months. Now, what was a story goes, you know, which is what all the newspaper people did and all the local TV people did. I decided it really isn't about this ferry at all. It's about how we save ourselves in hard time by connections and find something we're passionate about. And oh, by the way, isn't it a lovely place? I mean, we shot the hell out of this. It's gorgeous. We've got a dragonfly that comes in and lands in the scene. And then right after that, there is an osprey, which is kind of like a sea eagle. It comes and it grabs a fish in the background. I'm going, put it all in, all of it in. Let it run long, you know. Anyway, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Have a great week.